Now, folks, I don't know how it is at your house, but here in Chaco, it has been a blistering day. Hot as a $2 pistol all day, 94 degrees in the shade. But it's late in the evening, and I decided, in spite of that airplane you hear going on up there, to come out to my outdoor studio and do it instead of doing it inside. Hopefully the sweat won't roll off too bad. But just before I came out, I got an email from an old friend of mine down in New Orleans, and I thought I'd share this with you because it has just been a tough week. People have been, seems like, at each other's backs. The stock market's gone to hell in a handbasket, and nobody knows when we're going to get out of that. Nobody knows what to do, seems like. And it's just been a tough week, tough 2 weeks, month. So I decided to try to do things a little differently today. Although we've got some conversations lined up, I thought we'd have a little levity today and try to get a little break for a change. But just before I came out here, I got an email from an old friend in New Orleans. And I thought I'd share that with you before we get into what I really wanted to talk to you about. He said the scientists at NASA built a gun specifically to launch a standard 4-pound dead chicken at the windshield of airliners, military jets, and space shuttle, all traveling at maximum velocity. And the idea is to simulate the frequent incidents of collisions with airborne fowl to test the strengths of the windshields. Makes sense. The British engineers heard about the gun and were eager to test it on the windshield of their new high-speed trains. Arrangements were made, and the gun was sent to the British engineers. Well, when the gun was fired, the engineers stood shocked as the chicken hurled out of the barrel, crashed into the shatterproof shield, smashed it to smithereens, blasted through the control console, snapped the engineer's backrest in two, and embedded itself in the back wall of the cabin like an arrow shot from a bow. Well, the horrified Brits sent NASA the disastrous results of the experiment along with the designs of the windshield and begged the U.S. scientists for suggestions. And NASA responded with a one-line memo. First, you defrost the chicken. Well, does that make sense? Supposedly it really happened. I don't know. You can check that out, but it makes a good story anyway. Now, what I was going to talk about before we got into that was The World According to Student Bloopers by a man named Richard Lederer of St. Paul's School. I don't know where St. Paul's is located, and I don't know where this thing came from, but I'm giving him credit anyway. He says one of the fringe benefits of being an English or a history teacher is receiving the occasional jewel of a student blooper in an essay. He said, I've pasted together the following history of the world from certifiably genuine student bloopers collected by teachers throughout the United States, from the 8th grade through college level. Read carefully, and you'll learn a lot. Now, these are supposed to be really, really true stories that they got. The inhabitants, and you hear that tractor? Just ignore it. The inhabitants of ancient Egypt were called mummies. They lived in the Sahara Desert, and traveled by camel-lot. The climate of certain areas of the desert are cultivated by irrigation. And the Egyptians built the pyramids in the shape of huge triangular cubes. The pyramids are a range of mountains between France and Spain. The Bible is full of interesting caricatures. In the first book of the Bible, Genesis, Adam and Eve were created from an apple tree. One of their children, Cain, once asked, am I my brother's son? And God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Montezuma. Jacob, the son of Isaac, stole his brother's birthmark, Jacob was a patriarch who brought up his 12 sons to be patriarchs, but they didn't take to it. And one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, gave refuse to the Israelites. Now, Pharaoh forced the Hebrew slaves to make bread without straw. Moses led them to the Red Sea, where they made unleavened bread, which is bread made without any ingredients. Afterwards, Moses went up on Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. David was a Hebrew king skilled at playing the lyre. He fought with the Philistines. They said, not Philistines, but I can't pronounce what they said. A race of people who lived in biblical times, and Solomon, one of David's sons, had 500 wives and 500 porcupines. Now, without Greeks, we wouldn't have history. The Greeks invented 3 kinds of columns: Cerinthian, Doric, and Ironic. They also had myths. A myth is a female moth. One myth says that the mother of Achilles appears in the Iliad by Homer. Homer also wrote the Odyssey, in which Penelope was the last hardship Ulysses endured on his journey. Actually, Homer was not written by Homer, but by another man of that name. Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. Socrates died of an overdose of wedlock. The greatest writer of the Renaissance was William Shakespeare. Shakespeare never made much money and is famous only for his plays. He lived at Windsor with his merry wives, writing tragedies, comedies, and errors. One of Shakespeare's famous plays, Hamlet, rations out his situation by relieving himself in a long soliloquy. In another, Lady Macbeth tries to convince Macbeth to kill the king by attacking his manhood. Romeo and Juliet are an example of a heroic couplet. And writing at the same time as Shakespeare was Miguel Cervantes. He wrote Don Quixote. The next great author was John Milton. Milton wrote Paradise Lost. Then his wife died, and he wrote Paradise Regained. And during the Renaissance, America began. Bet you didn't know that. Christopher Columbus was a great navigator who discovered America while cursing about the Atlantic. His ships were called the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Fe. The Pilgrims later crossed the ocean, and this was known as Pilgrim's Progress. And when they landed at Plymouth Rock, they were greeted by the Indians who came down the hill rolling their war whoops ahead of them. The Indian squabs carried porpoises on their back. Many of the Indian heroes were killed along with their cabooses, which proved very fatal to them. The winter of 1620 was a hard one for the settlers. Many people died and many babies were born. Captain John Smith was responsible for this. Now, one of the causes of the Revolutionary Wars was the English put tax in their tea. Also, the colonists would send their parcels through the post without stamps. During the war, the Redcoats and Paul Revere were throwing balls over stone walls, whatever that means. The dogs were barking and the peacocks crowing, and finally the colonists won the war and no longer had to pay for taxis. Delegates from the 13 states formed the Contented Congress. Thomas Jefferson, a virgin, and Benjamin Franklin were 2 singers of the Declaration of Independence. And Franklin had gone to Boston carrying all his clothes in his pocket and a loaf of bread under each arm. He invented electricity by rubbing cats backward and declared, "A horse divided against itself cannot stand." Franklin died in 1790. and is still dead. George Washington married Martha Curtis, and in due time became the father of our country. Then the Constitution of the United States was adopted to secure the domestic hostility. Under the Constitution, the people enjoyed the right to keep bear, B-A-R-E, arms. Well, we're pretty close to the end. In the Olympic Games, the Greeks ran races, jumped, hurled the biscuits, and threw the Java. The reward to the victor was a coral wreath. The government of Athens was democratic because the people took the law into their own hands. that may sound familiar. There were no wars in Greece because the mountains were so high they couldn't climb over to see what their neighbors were doing. And when they fought with the Persians, the Greeks were outnumbered because the Persians had more men. Eventually, the Romans conquered the Greeks. History calls people Romans because they never stayed in one place for very long. At Roman banquets, guests wore garlics in their hair. And Julius Caesar extinguished himself on the battlefields of Gaul. The Ides of March murdered him because they thought he was going to be made king. And Nero was a cruel tyranny who would torture his poor subjects by playing his fiddle to them. Then came the Middle Ages. King Alfred conquered the Danes. King Arthur lived in the age of chivalry. And King Harold mustered his troops before the Battle of Hastings. Joan of Arc was canonized by Bernard Shaw. And the victims of the Black Death grew boobs on their necks. Finally, Magna Carta provided that no free man should be hanged twice for the same offense. In medieval times, most of the people were all illiterate. The greatest writer of the time was Chaucer, who wrote many poems and verses and also wrote literature. Another tale tells of William Tell, who shot an arrow through an apple while standing on his son's head. And the Renaissance was an age in which more people felt the value of their human being, whatever that means. Martin Luther was nailed to the church door at Wittenberg for selling church indulgences. He died a horrible death, being excommunicated by a bull. It was the painter Donatello's interest in the female nude that made him the father of the Renaissance. The government of England had a limited mockery. Henry VIII found walking difficult because he had an abscess on his knee, and Queen Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. As a queen, she was a success. When Elizabeth exposed herself before the troops, they all shouted, "Hurrah!" Then her navy went out and defeated the Spanish armadillo. Well, and it was an age of great inventions and discoveries. Gutenberg invented the Bible. Sir Walter Raleigh is a historical figure because he invented cigarettes. Another important invention was the circulation of blood. And we're going to quit on this one. Sir Francis Drake circumcised the world with a 100-foot clipper. Enough of that. I hope you got a grin out of that like I did. It was sort of what I needed at this time, and I thought maybe you might enjoy it too. My little website is up, jimritchie.us. US I like better than com because it stands either for the United States or us, me and you. So look at it. My books and the CD are on there. Any books ordered through there, I'll sign. Some of the others through Amazon, and I do have my Chaco Tale Southern Fried Sagas is a recorded book. I read that and recorded it. So we've got some very interesting people coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, And I think you'll be interested in those. We'll get to them. I just thought today might be a little break, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, until next time, I'm Jim Ritchie, and I'll see you again next time.